Okay, hi everyone. This is Ron McKinney from Pare do Photo with our next webinar featuring Andrew Eccles. Just a couple notes before we get started. In your chat, it defaults so it says that you're only going to send the chat to panelists. I do ask that you change that so it says to panelists and attendees so everybody can see any of your questions. If you do have any questions during the webinar, put them in the chat box as opposed to the Q&A. I tend to monitor the chat box for that. We'll be answering questions as we can, during this thing. So, I want to introduce you to Andrew Eccles. He's in LA. He's he does a lot of different types of work, celebrity, entertainment, advertising. He's done some music video covers like for Josh Groban and, but here in the dance world where he's really made his mark is with his work with the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater, and he's been with them now for 30 years. So from there, I'm going to turn things over to Andrew and let him talk a little bit about that.
All right. Good morning, Ron, and good morning, everybody. Ron, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Good. Thank you, Ron, so much for inviting me to do this. And hello and welcome to everybody out there. I wish I could see you all. I saw your chats coming in the side window, and I see some fellow Canadians. I grew up in Toronto and went to high school in Vancouver and went to art college back in Toronto before moving to New York a long time ago. So, but nice to see everybody from wherever you're calling in from. So I hope you enjoy this webinar. I want to talk about my absolute favorite part of my work and my career, which is the work I've done with the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. I'm not primarily a dance photographer, but photographing dancers has been the most fulfilling part of the work that I do, for sure. And I'm going to share with you how my career sort of got me to where I am with the Alvin Ailey company, and how I met them, how I was introduced to taking pictures for them. And so at this point, now that I've said good morning or good afternoon, or maybe even good evening, depending on where you're calling from, we're gonna do a little screen share and I'm gonna show you some pictures. I will preemptively apologize for any technical issues we may have. As smooth as this, I hope this goes smoothly, and I am a bit of a perfectionist, but it may not, but we'll do our best. So at this point, I am going to attempt to share my screen. How are we doing so far, Ron?
It looks great.
So we titled this webinar, Ailey Ascending, A Portrait in Motion, which is actually the title of a book that I photographed and a book that was published by Chronicle in 2008, celebrating the Ailey company's 50th anniversary. I'll get back to that in a moment, but really it all began in 1989. My affinity for dance may have come from the fact that my sister was a ballet dancer. We were growing up in Canada, and I was like a normal Canadian kid. I played ice hockey and stuff, but my sister was 4 years older than me, and she was sent to the National Ballet School of Canada. And so I would be sort of dragged off to the Nutcracker around Christmas and other things that my sister, turned up in. And she would have friends over often and for sleepovers, and they were, these little ballet dancers. And I was just sort of around this dance community at a very young age. And because I looked up to my older sister, anything she did, I thought was so cool. And that, of course, included dance. And that may have been my first exposure, but it kind of kept returning throughout my life. And when I got into photography and left the Ontario College of Art in Toronto and made my way to New York, I ended up getting an apprenticeship with Annie Leibovitz, which really um, paved the way for where my career went. The reason, you know, working for Annie meant so many things, but one of the things that really rubbed off is she had an affinity and love for photographing dancers. There's this collaborative experience between dancers and photographers that is unique in that dance requires a photographer to capture a single moment for us to really appreciate what is happening in motion that goes so quickly we sort of can't break it down. And it's also, dancers sort of have a work ethic and a shared love of wanting to create something magnificent and beautiful. So sort of the symbiotic relationship between photographer and subject with dance photography is really, really unique. So that sort of rubbed off on me. And then I began my career, and I'll tell you, this is a very quick little story. At the end of my assisting Annie, we had photographed a dance company. I can't remember which one. And the manager of that company went on to work with a different company in New York, knew she couldn't afford Annie to take pictures of their dancers, and contacted me to see if I could. Now, it was right at the end of my tenure working with Annie, and I can't believe we did this when I look back on it, but she asked if I would photograph the company. They were called the David Gordon Pickup Company. And I was nervous, but said sure, and we discussed how we could do it. And what we risked doing was sneaking into Annie's studio on a Saturday morning with this dance company, setting up lights and photographing them. I was so afraid to ask Annie permission, which is silly looking back on it, but we were, of course, hoping the whole time that Annie wouldn't just come walking in the door, which she could have, and I'm not sure what I would have done had she. But that little photo shoot that we did with these dancers, that was really the first stepping stone in my dance photography career, and maybe just my career alone, because what I did was, after I photographed the company, I got phone numbers of all the dancers, and I reached out to them privately and did private little sessions with them. And those photographs became my first portfolio that I ran around to magazines in New York. Interestingly enough, when the magazines saw those pictures, they saw beautiful bodies in tights, and they associated that with fitness and exercise. So all my first assignments were shooting fitness and exercise. But simultaneously, and I'm getting to the picture on the screen, simultaneously I was also showing portraits I had done to magazines and was being assigned portraits of different interesting people. And one day I was photographed in September of 1989. I was assigned to photograph legendary dance choreographer Alvin Ailey. I didn't know much about the company. I knew the name, I knew of them, but I sort of, plodded up to the Ailey building, and with one assistant went into a little dance rehearsal studio where I was sent to set up and put up a canvas backdrop. And I think somebody from the company said, oh, he does a very famous dance with a bent wood chair here, maybe you'll want this. And they sat it down, and I kind of got ready, and I didn't really know what to expect. And Mr. Ailey came in, and he's tall and formidable, and we shook hands, and I was immediately nervous. I was really young. And we didn't really say very much. He sat down on this chair and slowly started to move. I thought I was going to need to direct him, but he just found himself sort of behind the chair and crouching and pushing his face through the window, through the opening in the chair, and making these different expressions. And it was back in the days of film, so I just kept shooting and putting new film backs on the back of my camera and shooting. And after about 15 minutes of this was pretty serious and a little intimidating, to be honest, he broke into a smile and said, "You've got it." Stood up, he shook my hand, and he walked out.
So how much had you talked before, that very...
Usually in my photo sessions, I like to have what I call sort of coffee talk or something.
Right.
If somebody's at hair and makeup table getting ready, I'll go over and I'll bond with them. No bonding time. He came in, he didn't really allow it. It was more like photographing sort of an ambassador, which he actually became, cultural ambassador. But no, there was nothing that I remember. I mean, it was a long time ago, but I don't really remember. I mean, I'm pretty good at small talk, and I don't even think I got any small talk out. But the thing was, after he shook my hand and left, I could tell that he was really warm and kind. And that was that. And very, very sadly, 3 months, nearly to the day after our photo session, he passed away.
Yeah.
Now, little did I know that there was maybe something in that at the time I didn't really understand, but we'll circle back to that. I began to get assigned dancers to photograph more often in my career. The fitness, funnily enough, the fitness pictures kept the lights on. I was doing a lot of exercise pictures for magazines. I even did for any of you that are old enough to remember, Time Life used to do series of books. I shot 25 books on health, nutrition, and fitness. They would come to your door monthly, whether you wanted them or not, if you signed up for them. But that kept me paying the rent. And then I could do creative work in between those assignments a couple of days a week. And so I was photographing other dancers, and my dance work soon got recognized by a magazine called Dance Inc., which was a beautiful publication back in the 90s. There were no advertisements. It was privately funded by somebody who loved dance, a woman named Patsy Tar. And it was big. It was a big, beautiful magazine, and there was all sorts of artistic opportunities for us photographers to shoot interesting creative images. And so this became another sort of springboard for me. And they went ahead and assigned me to photograph a portrait of Judith Jamison. Now, Judith was Alvin Ailey's signature dancer. She, I have some little notes over here. Let's see. I photographed her in 1995. She had joined the Ailey Company in 1965, and she became hugely famous for a dance that Alvin choreographed called Cry. World famous, extraordinary artist. As before Alvin passed, he had asked Judith to take over at the Ailey Company as in the role of creative director. So here I was, 5-6 years later, photographing the new creative director. And these were some pictures of Judith from that session. There was some fun creative films back then. Polaroid had put out some 35 millimeter instant films. There was Polograph and Polapan, and I used to use positive, negative Polaroid 665 with my Mamiya camera, and I used to play with these sorts of techniques that would give us creative borders and interesting grain, and a certain amount of that photography. Back then, because it wasn't digital, we couldn't show our subjects exactly what we're doing unless we were using some sort of Polaroid film. So Judith could see the pictures we were taking as we were taking them and loved them, and she really liked what ran in the magazine and invited me to do a publicity and advertising session with the company. And that began what has been, I think Ron said 30 years, and I think we're close, between 25 and 30 years of consistently photographing the company for all of their advertising and PR needs, which means shooting their posters and PR pictures for their brochures. And that has been a relationship that I am so utterly grateful to have had. So that sort of brings me up to speed here. And Ron, maybe we'll just take a quick pause and see if there's a question you want to fit in at this moment.
So far, no questions. Just one of our attendees is actually a Dance Inc. alumnus and subscribed to that magazine. So just made a comment like that. So these images here are obviously much more recent images.
Well, they are actually, the one on the left, I think it says, was 2004. The one in the middle was from a couple of years back. So we could almost have a webinar just about the sort of Ailey brand. What I didn't really realize, well, first and foremost, I didn't realize that the day that I photographed Alvin, and hindsight's 20/20. But for whatever reason, I've looked back upon it as, for some reason, I think that he was sort of passing me some kind of baton. You know, there's too much coincidence that took place for me not to believe in some sort of preordained fate. This was, I don't know that I necessarily deserved or earned my way into taking pictures of this company, but there's no doubt there was something rather interesting and spiritual that kind of took place, that I would photograph Alvin and Judith and then end up being sort of the visual messenger for Alvin's original, vision.
How did that work out? I mean, obviously, you had that shoot with Judith, so you were creating a relationship with her, and she was very impressed with your work. But they must have obviously already had a photographer in place, and was that sort of the thing where they just decided to move on and just go directly with you? And we do have a question from Christopher saying that, he's wondering, at the time, I guess, did you have any other photographers competing with you to shoot Ailey, and how'd you handle that? Or was it just a matter of Judith knew you, she wanted you, and it happened?
Sort of two-part answer. Yes, there was a photographer, and oh, forgive me, there's going to be an Ailey alumni or somebody in the chat that's going to help me with the name. I'm just blanking, and I should have had it written in my notes. But there was a photographer that did a great deal of Ailey's photography work for many, many years prior to me. When I was invited in, there was sort of a mix of different photographers that were shooting the campaigns for Judith different years. One of them was Annie. One of them was Annie Leibovitz. And she did a magnificent campaign one year. The pictures are stunning. And I always sort of had that kind of hanging over my head, feeling like I'd never be able to match.
Nicole just said Jack Mitchell, and then David Cooper jumped in with that too.
Thank you, Nicole and David. Yes, that was, I was like, it's Mitchell, I think, but I should have written down. But actually, Jack called me very late in his life after I had been Ailey's photographer for a number of years. It was such an honor to talk to him, and he was so gracious. He called to congratulate me on my images, and so did Annie. Funnily enough, Annie, I ran into her after a number of years shooting Ailey, and she, went on and on about how proud she was and how much she liked the work. So that was sort of how I ended up with Ailey. I'm singling this photograph just because out of all of the campaigns, well, you know what? Let me circle back for 1 second. The Ailey brand. So when I was brought in, whatever it was that I do, which I think is a relatively clean, crisp, sharp kind of photography generally, and for dance particularly, I'm technically extremely self-critical and demanding. I mentioned earlier being a perfectionist. I wanted to make sure that I mastered the art of stopping motion, being able to freeze dancers so there's no blur, there's no ambient drag around the toes, feet, laces on their footwear, anything. And that look of airborne, beautiful dancers sort of became the Ailey brand. And for those of you in New York who would once a year see the campaign slathered all over subway stations and taxi tops and bus sides, and it was usually a beautiful dancer, airborne, against a different colored backdrop. And it was that for years. And the brand became so significant that other companies didn't want to work with me anymore because I sort of had this look. And then I also sort of didn't really want to work with other companies because I felt like I was in this marriage with Ailey and didn't really want to, wanted to be faithful. So, but, fast forward, and Judith Jamison eventually retired, and Robert Battle came in to replace her as creative director. And actually, when Robert came in, I thought to myself, okay, well, I'm out of a job, because usually when a creative director changes, the first thing they replace is the photographer. And I remember meeting with Robert and saying, like, are you going to fire me? And he laughed and he said, no, why would I do that? And I said, well, you know, you might want to change direction. This would be an opportunity. And he's like, I love the direction. And he was sort of the thinking, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we kind of kept with that vibe for a while, but then I had a number of creative conversations with the company about, look, other companies are doing very revolutionary, exciting photography. Our stuff is great, it's strong, it's traditional, but I think maybe we need to raise the bar. So we began to try different looks. We maintained the beautiful body, airborne graphic quality of things with an image like this, but obviously this is a much more modern and much more creative take on our traditional classical vibe. So this was a collaborative piece that I did with two of the dancers. This is Linda Celeste Sims and her husband Glenn Sims. Can you believe these two are married? They were in the company, I think the longest of any dancers, certainly probably since Judith. I may be corrected in the chat area. I think they were with the company 20 some, I think they joined in 96 and 97. And I was asked to create an image for a photo studio in Los Angeles called Smashbox. And Smashbox merged with another photo studio called Quixote, and they asked photographers that use those studios to come up with an image that that somehow contained a box and a merge. So I thought married couple. I came up with an idea of a Rubik's Cube. I built a box. I did all these pictures. We ended up putting together this collage, and that was the image. And I forget the year, but I think whatever year this image was created, American Photo Magazine, I think, picked it as one of their top images of that year.
Andrew, when you're doing a shoot like this, was Judith right there with you? Was Robert right there with you? You know, just kind of, and how did that work, you know, doing the shoot? Like, because obviously you have your photographic eye, they've got their dance eye, and then it needs to merge together.
Sure. Funnily enough, on this one, I think I was a bit left alone because it was more or less self-conceived and created. But whenever I was shooting Eccles campaigns, this is not last year, it's because of COVID. The year before, I think this was the image that was used for the campaign. Yes, the creative director was always there. Judith was always there and helped direct with the help of their main choreographer, Chaya, who was also with me. Also, Thomas Christopher from PR marketing and publicity would be with me. It was definitely a collective, and it was very, very choreographed. You know, I needed the help because, as familiar as I am with the company and their dances, we needed to structure each picture before we took it. And the beautiful thing about shooting digitally is we have the ability to see right away what we've done. And if it needed correcting, we could correct it. You know, that was something with film. It was, you know, what I used to call sort of hope and a prayer productions. You know, we would shoot on film and somebody would jump. Well, I thought, well, I better do 10. I'll shoot a whole roll just in case. Now, sometimes the dancer will jump, we'll capture it. If it's great, we'll do one more. Often the second one isn't as good, and we'll stop there. It preserves, you know, it saves us time. It preserves the dancers' bodies, and that's something that, you know, has really helped. In 2008, to celebrate the Eccles' 50th anniversary, Judith Jamison came to me and asked if I would do a photo book of the company, and I thought she meant compile images that I had already taken, or sort of that they would be putting together some sort of compilation of my work and other people's work. And she said, no, I want you to do a photo book, just full bleed photos of the company today, now, at 50 years. So I photographed them while they were performing. I embedded myself with the company for several weeks. if this was in, I think, performance space in New Jersey, I would get the dancers in and amongst performances. I would set up little photo shoots on my own. Um, this one is kind of wonderful because it's a true cop moment. I don't ever Photoshop together dancers when I shoot them. This was essentially on a count 5, 6, 7, 8 up, and Matthew, the gentleman in the foreground, he was seated, and he pushed himself off the ground when they all jumped. So this is a true cop moment, which is really, for the campaigns, for the advertising campaigns, once in a while, the art director will swap a head or maybe change a foot on a dancer, but we don't ever sort of mess around in Photoshop to create stuff. Any questions at this moment, Ron?
Nope, not yet. Anthony just said beautiful work.
Thank you, Anthony.
And JL's had, like a few questions, but you've actually been answering them without me even having to ask. The only other question that he did ask that we haven't gotten to is whether you ever worked with Eccles too.
You know what? I did a picture of Eccles too for this book, but no, they actually have a different photographer. I'm not sure who's shooting them now, but they've traditionally had a separate photographer shoot Eccles too. Which,
okay, that photo we just saw of everyone going up. Dan Browning asked how many takes did it take for you to get that one?
You know what, I recall, I think we did probably about maybe 10 jumps, maybe less. I mean, the fun thing about these folks is, we'd shoot one, and when it was digital, they would come down, and then they'd all run over to the monitor and look, and then they'll go, oh, I could do that better. And that's the wonderful thing about working with dancers, is they're always looking to please, to collaborate, to, get it right, do it as many times as it takes. It's kind of a wonderful collaboration. This is Glenn and Linda again, and these were pictures from the book. These are 2 other images from the book. And now at this point, I want to share a different screen, if I can. And just in the, just to share with you how we've sort of wanted in the last few years of the campaigns we've done with Eccles to try changing things up, and create more contemporary imagery that holds up against a lot of what's going on out there.
And it's kind of hard to take your eyes off the dancer here, but if you look in the background and just watch the change in the paint, I just love that. So
this was inspired. So the year that we shot this campaign, it was inspired by the designer McQueen. Help. Sorry, I did do some preparation. It'll come Alexander McQueen. He did a fashion show where the models were wearing white garments, and there were robots that were twirling and spraying paint onto the models. So what we ended up doing was we did the dancers, and we built out a set with a white seamless floor and a white seamless background paper. And we shot them. We had stagehands on either side with those big high-powered water guns, squirt guns, filled with watered-down paint. And you can see the paint coming in from from the sides. And I shot with a 35mm camera, literally motor-driven images shot on a tripod that we then built out as GIFs afterwards. And we did a number of different ones. You can really see the paint coming in from the side here. And we have some variations that really started where the dancers had no paint on them all the way up to when they were covered in paint. And that ended up being the campaign. And I remember that was one time where, you know, I sort of talked with the powers that be at the company, and I said, you know, when we ran that campaign of the picture of the dancer covered in splattered paint, were people disappointed when they came to the performance and that wasn't one of the performances? And, you know, and I think some people were, because I think they, you know, they expected to see something like this, but it was fun, and I was excited that they were able to, you know, give me the opportunity to try these sort of, you know, new and unusual things. And we were really getting on a roll. And funnily enough, you know, when the world closed down because of the COVID pandemic, and my heart goes out to anybody who's dealing with this personally. I think almost everybody has in one way or another. At this point, we were actually getting ready to do another campaign shoot, which was indefinitely postponed. So I'm hoping, we usually shoot in the spring, so hopefully we'll be able to come back and do that.
On this shoot here, was this your idea?
No, they came up with the concept. I think it was Thomas Cott at the Eccles company. I don't know if he's on. I don't know if he's watching today. If you are, hi Thomas. But no, they brought that idea to me, and I said, great. You know, I said, it's going to be a mess. You know, we're going to have to figure out how to control everything. And you know, we changed that floor and that background a number of times throughout the day. So, so let's move on to 2015. I was invited by the company to accompany them to South Africa, which, let me just make sure here. Yeah, 2015. And it was the first time that the company had visited South Africa since 1998. And it was really an honor, and we'll talk about it after this little 30-second teaser. I shot the trip with print film and with motion. Here's a quick little 30-second teaser of our first week there. So let's go back to, where is our, well, let's see. There we go. So we went to South Africa together, and the Eccles company had just been, I don't know if awarded is the right term, but had just officially been made cultural ambassadors for the United States for all of the countries they visit and all of the outreach they do all over the world. Again, I don't have all of the statistics for how many different countries they've toured in and visited throughout their since their inception, but traveling to South Africa was of tremendous significance. A certain amount of Mr. Ailey's choreography comes from African dance. Of course, he was inspired by his rural East Texas roots as well, but he was also inspired by sort of the urban experience. His most famous quote is, "Dance came from the people, so we need to give it back to the people." I'm paraphrasing, I don't know if that's word for word. But so it was an exciting opportunity and a great honor to accompany Ailey to South Africa on this trip. But of course, South Africa, you hear South Africa, you have ideas in your head of what this is going to mean. And when we got there, it didn't end up being what I thought it was going to be. The company was performing in Johannesburg for, I think, about 10 days. And then they were going to Cape Town after that. And in Johannesburg, with the season that we went, it was winter. So although the weather was pretty good here in this picture, it was cold and it was rainy. And we were staying near the performance venue, which was sort of on the outskirts of Johannesburg. It was sort of like a Vegas shopping mall looking thing. It was very short on locations. The dancers' time was filled with outreach and press techs and rehearsals, so I didn't get much access with the dancers, but tried to squeeze in little shoots with them in between all those other things that I was covering. So one day we went to downtown Johannesburg and photographed some dancers in this sort of part of town that was covered in graffiti. Actually, Johannesburg is well known and quite famous for its graffiti. So that was a start.
When you're doing this, are you like is it you and just like a group of dancers? Is Robert there with you as well, or how is that working?
What we were doing was I would usually go with either Thomas Cott or Christopher Zuner from PR and/or marketing. They took shifts on this trip. I would go with one or two dancers. We had these small pockets of time, maybe 2 hours, where we could go somewhere between the rehearsals. But, the dancers have to clock in and clock out. So they would lend them to me for these brief periods of time. But there really would be just sort of a small group of us. There was me. I had a camera operator as a DP that was shooting film. Me and one assistant and one digital tech. So there'd be a little crew of us. And then we also had, in Johannesburg, we had to have protection with us. We had to have pretty heavy security presence with us. A couple of very large gentlemen that made sure that nobody, wanted to run off with our cameras, because that's a bit of a thing there. But so we sort of tried to schedule these different shoots. These are the Soweto Towers, which are of historical significance in the townships outside of Johannesburg. We did pictures there. Then what I really wanted to try was to somehow get access to animals, because it just felt to me that Africa, one thinks of beautiful wild African animals. But I thought, well, how do we do that? Here we are in Johannesburg. So with the help of the same guys at Ailey, Christopher Zuner and Thomas Cott, I worked with them to try to sort of organize how we could access doing pictures with animals. And this was the first of those photo shoots. And we went to a lion park outside of Johannesburg, and it's a place where, you can sort of do a little day trip. But we were able to arrange to get access to this really beautiful cougar. I think his name was Oscar. And we had a trainer off to the side. And we carefully did dance pictures with this magnificent animal. What was sort of Felix, maybe it's Felix, I think. What was fascinating was we didn't really know how this was, going to go. And obviously we hoped it would be safe. There had been an accident at this park a few months prior. Actually, there was a woman from Brooklyn who very, very sadly lost her life. She was mauled by a lion at this park. And so I didn't even know if we'd be given access. I thought that there would be all sorts of red tape to get through. There wasn't a lot. We signed some forms, and the trainer that was going to take us to an area to work with this cougar, we all got into sort of a caged truck, and she said, "Let's go get the cougar." Well, I sort of thought we'd go to the area in a van and the cougar would come in a caged truck, but no, we pulled up to an area and she opened the door and this cougar came walking in to the bus.
Alan's saying it's a cheetah.
Cheetah. Thank you. Correct. Cheetah. Sorry. And you're absolutely right. And here we are on this bus with a cheetah sort of strolling up and down. And the woman said, the trainer told us, take off our sunglasses. And so that we could make eye contact, which was interesting. And get a chance to sort of get to know the cheetah. And we were all a little on edge. It was, it was kind of nerve-wracking. But we went out to this area where the cheetah is comfortable walking with people on sort of reserved little sort of walks that the park offers, and we did pictures, and it was exciting, and it was a little nerve-wracking. And after we had done pictures for about 15 or 20 minutes and various different poses, this is a little hard to see, but the cheetah at one point put his paw on our dancer's leg. And the one thing that I learned that day is that cheetahs never retract their claws. They're always out. So although it was kind of relatively gentle, he did it about 3 times in a row, and we all agreed it was time to call it quits. But,
How nervous was the dancer even before that happened?
You know what? She was just cool as a cucumber. Just amazing. She completely held her ground through the whole thing, and was calm and wonderful.
And then how well were these animals at taking direction from you?
They were not good at taking direction from me, but they were good at taking direction from the trainer.
Oh, okay.
To a degree.
So in that last picture with the cheetah up on the rock, I mean the trainer, got him up there and even got the cheetah to like turn and look this way towards the dancer?
Well, the cheetah kind of just did that. The one thing I think that the cheetah has in this little area, he has a path that he will walk, because the park advertises that you can, go for a walk with a cheetah. So, you take your family and a guide will take you and the cheetah, and you'll sort of walk around this little area. And he's got his pattern. I asked that we do things a little out of his regular order. And because I said, well, can we go over here? And the trainer said, sure. And I think when he got a bit out of his usual routine, I think that's when he got a little antsy.
Yeah.
And gosh, I wrote down all of our dancers' names, and for some reason I forgot. And I know, and I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on our beautiful dancer's name here. It'll come to me before the end of it. Somebody will probably put it in the chat. I'm so sorry that I'm blanking on her name at the moment. This is Jamar Robert.
That was Akua Noni Parker. Thanks to Nicole and Lynette both.
Akua Noni Parker. I hope if she's on, please forgive me. Please forgive me, Akua. She's an extraordinary dancer. And at the end of that session, I had just so much renewed respect for her, because, it took real bravery. I mean, she was excited to do it. She stayed so calm and moved so beautifully. And I think the cheetah was kind of captivated by the whole experience. But that night when I went back to the hotel, I definitely had some sort of post, nerves about it. I mean, of course, I suppose it could have gone poorly, and I'm so thankful and grateful that it didn't. But, you have to have some faith, I guess. So we went to a different park where we also were able to access some animals. So we had access to some elephants, and this is Jamar Roberts, who's a beautiful dancer. And he did this lovely little choreography with this elephant and the elephant's trunk. And apparently if you blow into an elephant's trunk, he'll remember you for the rest of his life. That's what we were told. So if Jamar goes back in years from now, that particular elephant may recall him. So it was, and it,
Before you go any further, Andrew, Kimmy asked a question. It's a really good question, I think. Did the dancers had to keep their movements slow, not to like startle the animals, or?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And yeah, we moved very, very slowly. That's why there'll be no, there's no pictures of jumps or anything with the animals. All of us moved very slowly. I've worked with my assistants to make sure that we didn't use any lighting on this, on these pictures. I just had committed to using all African daylight. Mm-hmm. But we moved carefully, no sudden movements. That was any of us. We all had to be careful not to drop anything or knock anything over. And really on the whole, the animals were extremely gentle and collaborative. And, and even the claw, even the cheetah claw on Akua's leg was not, was really pretty gentle. So this is Rachel McLaren, fellow Canadian. She's from Winnipeg. She's no longer with the company. She just had a baby, but she, magnificent dancer. And this happened to be her birthday. So this was sort of our birthday photo session that she got to dance with the elephants.
And I presume you didn't use any reflectors or flags either?
No, we really didn't. There was so much light. When the sun came out, it just sort of bounced around and kind of filled things in. So I decided, I did do some things with lights. Then one or two may turn up later. I think they turn up later in our show, but this just daylight. I was a little inspired by Herb Ritz, who did a beautiful book on Africa back in the, I think that was in the late 80s. I just sort of thought I can't, nor do I want to compete with African light. I think it's beautiful enough to just use on its own. So Yannick Lebrun, beautiful, beautiful dancer, dancing with ostriches.
That's really amazing, because it looks like they're simply interpreting the animals. And, is this a dancer is just like doing that on their own, kind of just like looking at it? And
somebody in the chat will remind me the name of the dance that Yannick's pose is from, which was inspired by ostriches, because I remember he struck this pose and then we all talked about it later. Somebody put it in the chat. But yes,
another really good question from Anthony is, like, did you guys have to work with the animals to get them in the right direction for the sun? So the lighting was the way that you wanted it for the dancer and the animal.
A little bit. I mean, there would, this wasn't a completely sort of seamless effort. I mean, when we first wanted the elephants, they all wanted to go stand back in the trees and in the bushes, like that one in the background, or they would want to eat. So we would have an elephant, but he'd be chomping on grass, and grass would be sticking out of his mouth. You have this sort of majestic idea that, oh, it's going to be this perfectly graceful moment. It's not. It was a little catch as catch can, but the trainers would help sort of guide. The ostriches did what they wanted to do. They're funny. The three of them they just turned up. I mean, we didn't invite them. They just literally just kind of turned up. I think they were interested to see what was going on. But we did our best to, if we wanted to have everybody in the sun, we would try to, turn the animal in something that worked out. This was the same area where the cheetah was. And this is a baby giraffe. And there's Akua again on the shoulder of Michael Jackson Jr., who's the breathtaking dancer that was in the picture with the purple and magenta lighting for the campaign that we did.
Here's another question. Eric Palmer asked this, were you conscious of the inevitable Avedon references when you were shooting with the elephants?
Yeah, I was. Hi, Eric. Nice to hear from you. the elephant, Avedon's elephant pictures were in the back of my mind. They're so brilliant and so beautiful, but sad also in retrospect, because they were elephants that are, are chained in place in some dreadful little holding stall. But they were magnificent pictures. I'd always wanted to take a picture with an elephant. Never had, but it's very difficult to control. And also the elephants, the elephants that we got when we got them, because again, keep in mind, we're given these tiny pockets of time. So the whole time that I'm working with these dancers, I'm looking at my watch going like, I've got 30 more minutes, 40 more minutes before because they have to be back at rehearsal on time or they'll be penalized. They'll either be fined or something. I mean, they're there to rehearse and perform. That's first and foremost. Doing little photo sessions with Andrew is pretty low on the list. So we kind of did what we could, but yes, I was inspired by Avedon's elephant pictures, Herb Ritz's Africa pictures, and a number of other, artists who have done work in these sorts of settings before, but we kind of just did our best. But, the lion cubs, we were sort of, again, like take it or leave it. And they were in this pen, which isn't ideal, but it was nap time for the lion cubs. And so Michael lay down with them.
That is awesome.
So this is an opportunity to sort of talk about something that I didn't know whether or not I would share, but I think it's good to share, given a lot of what's sort of happening in our world and our culture. I took this picture, which is a pose from a dance, and it's Jamar and Jacqueline Green, and I sort of saw these magnificent bodies in this magnificent setting with African animals. And, I'll be 100% transparent. The pictures were not initially received all that well by Judith Jamison, who, although she was no longer the creative director of the company, she's still the matriarch of the company. And one would only want her full-throated approval. But, she had some discomfort with the idea of these African-American bodies in Africa with African animals. And the way that the sort of question was put to me is, we have spent decades sort of moving away from the idea of sort of African dance and an African stereotype into the world of sophisticated modern dance in the sophisticated sort of cultural world of the performing arts. And I think she was a little concerned that maybe there was something in this that wasn't, that wasn't appropriate. And I remember at first, because I take everything personally, who wouldn't, I was sort of hurt. And I thought, well, have I done something wrong? And, we all sort of thought it through and looked at the pictures and thought, this is this great company that's come all this way. And here we are returning to South Africa. And we decided we felt like it was all right. But, I had to sit with that and I had to really contemplate it, because my number one goal was to make sure that I was respectful to the company, to the dancers, to the South Africans, to the heritage of this entire experience, and not make any kinds of cultural gaffes. So anyway, it was a conversation which I really respected. And honestly, if Judith had said, I don't like the idea of this, take them down, I don't want anybody to see them, I would have respected that. But I think she came around to it as well.
Good.
We also went to a neighborhood in Cape Town, because after Johannesburg, we went to Cape Town, and there's a neighborhood called Bo-Kaap, B-O-K-A-A-P, with these beautiful, colorful houses. Getting permission to take pictures in South Africa in general, Cape Town in particular, is very challenging. They don't like to grant permits for photography much. So this was a run and gun experience. We were definitely asked not to shoot there by a lot of residents that seemed pretty unhappy with the fact that people do come and take pictures, but with a lot of social massaging, and we ended up sort of not only working there, but doing it with their blessings. But it's a beautiful neighborhood, all these beautifully painted houses. Gorgeous dancer, Fauna from the company, who I think she's no longer with the company either. Sean Cameron, I believe. A lot of these little sessions that we had, you know, again, would drive around, and if we saw something pretty, we would jump out of the van and just shoot. And this is a cliff near Table Mountain, just outside of Cape Town. This is Table Mountain. We, you know, sometimes this one actually I used a light. I used an open head strobe with a little bit of diffusion over it, just to fill in the shadows, because this was one of those moments, Ron, where the light didn't actually all sort of
right
in the right place. You know, I had these dancers for this brief pocket of time. It was cold and windy. There's behind the scenes footage of me filming this. I'm wearing a winter coat and hat, lying on the street. They're directing traffic around me. Two guys are holding the light, which was blowing around, and you know, and here's this is Gray DeVore Stokes, and Gray is making it look effortless. And to me, that's one of sort of the benchmarks of a successful photograph, is that it looks effortless.
yeah
If it looks effortless, we've done our job.
and it looks like it's the middle of the summer,
And it, you know, and it was sunny. It was cold, and the wind in Cape Town, for anybody who's been there, is just crazy. And this was an area down alongside Table Mountain, also with Gray. We haven't got much more here. We've only got, I think, a few more. You know, I tried my best to do, this is Daniel, gosh, I thought I had his name down here, Daniel Harder, I think. This was actually just an area of botanical garden right in downtown Cape Town. They're just, I tried my best to do a little photo session with every dancer in the company over the 3 weeks that we were in South Africa.
and yes, it is Daniel Harder.
Daniel Harder, right? Thank you.
We have people just jumping in all the time. Anytime you have a question, somebody's got the answer.
Thank goodness, it's great.
Somebody's asking, do you generally shoot at small apertures? Dan Browning.
No. The sort of the school of photography that I came from, which was really the Annie Leibovitz school of photography, was stop down, fairly sharp front to back. I didn't really learn to use daylight or how to apply depth of field until much later in my career. I have a tendency to shoot fairly stop down because the camera that I shot a lot of my career with early on, especially in the film days, was the Mamiya RZ 6.7 camera. That camera, because it was a bellow focus camera, if you shot with too shallow an aperture, everything would be out of focus. It was kind of an all or nothing thing. It was very hard to get the subject in focus and throw the background out. Every time I tried, usually everything was out of focus. So I would, you know, sort of for safety's sake, tend to shoot with much, you know, stop down with much sort of sharper apertures, not sharper, but so that foreground and background were in focus.
Yeah, that's actually what Dan meant. He was wondering if you like to shoot at f11, f16. So
yeah, I mean, for the most part, when I'm in the studio, yes, always 11, 16, even 22. You know, I remember kind of thinking, what's the point? Like, you might as well make sure everything's sharp. The only thing with dance, and this could be another webinar another time, when you're in the studio, if you're stopped way down like that, you need a great deal of light And the more light you have on, the more high power, the longer the flash duration, the harder it is to freeze motion. But that's its own little half-hour lesson. Next time I teach a workshop after COVID, come and I will show you how to stop motion with strobes. I've done that often. This is Belen, right? Come on, where? Yes. It'll come up in the chat there. I know I have it written down here. Also, just in the botanical garden near the hotel. Literally, I think these were the last two dancers that I hadn't photographed yet. And we did a quick session in the botanical garden near the hotel before heading to the airport. I guess the most magnificent of the locations that we visited was the Atlantis Dunes outside of Cape Town. I just want to quickly check the time. Not many more, folks. And this is Jeroboam Bozeman, who may have successfully posed for, I think, my favorite photograph that I took in South Africa. This location was magnificent.
Yeah.
As pristine and beautiful as it is, you know, they tend to use it as sort of a recreational area, and there's recreational vehicles and dune buggies driving all over it. So we've sort of thankfully found an area where there was none of that. It's so pristine. I can't imagine wanting to mess it up. But
yeah, you're getting a lot of comments about how beautiful this is.
But I imagine many of you are photographers in the chat room. Some of you may be dancers, but as a photographer, even though I've been doing this for a long time, there's been certain moments where I'm kind of overwhelmed by all that's going on in front of me. And I feel, at times I feel a little bit of panic that I'm not capturing the best thing there is there to capture. I mean, I kind of went into a little bit of I sort of found that when we arrived at these sand dunes, everything looked beautiful, but I didn't know how to pick. And I think that, you know, I didn't know what pose in what place with what background. And when that happens, I think you just have to stop and breathe and just allow the photographs to just find themselves. You know, it was all beautiful. The dancers are all beautiful. The light was beautiful. The dunes were beautiful. And so I kind of just tried to get myself to relax and say, it is what it is. Sure. Could there have been something better in hindsight? Absolutely. Could it have been a better time of day? Well, that was the only time of day we were given with the dancers. You know, we drove an hour and a half to these sand dunes. I think we had an hour there, and then we had to bolt back to rehearsal. The Samantha Figgins, I believe.
You have a couple of photographers who are responding to what you're saying here. Judy Host is saying, you know, thank you for saying that. And Drew Forsyth is saying, God, you know, that feeling very relatable. It's Winnie Turner, the same thing. So
I'll also quote the great Jay Mizell. He has a famous quote that some of you may have heard, that when you think you have the shot, turn around and look in the other direction. Because sometimes when you're really committed to sort of one view and you've got it all set up, you turn around and go, oh, wait a minute. So I tend to do that as well. But I think there's just times where you have to say, this is what it was. This was that moment, that day with these people in that place. Yeah, and that's what it is. And it was amazing. It
was amazing.
And this was a good one as we sort of near the end here, because when Samantha fell into this pose, I kid you not, that I literally felt, and I'm not a wildly spiritual person, somewhat spiritual person. I really felt like Alvin himself was leaning down and wrapping his arms around the back of her waist and gently pulling her up the dune. Like there was this feeling that he was there, that he was watching, that he was approving, I hope. I really hope. But when she fell into this pose, it's not, this pose just looks like it needs to be guided by another entity, like pulling her. There was really a kind of a magnificent, just spiritual connection that really took me all the way back to those first photos of Alvin. We're almost there. This is Musenberg Beach. This is Samuel Lee Roberts and Sarah Daly Perdomo, both magnificent dancers. This was another thing. Musenberg Beach has all these little Victorian beach huts, miles of them, all painted different colors. Same thing, whoever shared in that experience of, am I taking the best picture in this place? It was really hard to know. I took tons and tons of photographs. I have hundreds of images that I'm not showing you, many of them very good. It's, or many that I like, but it was hard to decide what was best. There's some beautiful rock formations at a beach just near Cape Town that we worked on our last day before we left. The weather there is very volatile. It changes often and dramatically. This is Bernard Gilmore, beautiful dancer. And then this is our last picture for today, and this is a sculpture of Nelson Mandela in Pretoria. Yeah.
I have to wonder, how they felt, about posing in front of Nelson Mandela like that. I mean, I just think that's so amazing that, they have this opportunity to do that.
There is, on my website, there's a section called Series, and in that section, you'll see an image of Alien Africa. You can click on that, and there'll be a video, which is maybe 10 or 15 minutes long, of my photographing the dancers throughout this trip. And it's got some behind the scenes footage and interviews with the dancers. And these two speak about how they felt that day in front of this Mandela sculpture. And I mean, there's all sorts of things that I don't have time to sort of share with you, but we went to Robben Island and we went and looked into Nelson Mandela's cell where he was kept for many, many years. There was all sorts of powerful, wonderful, meaningful experiences throughout this trip. But, and this was another day where we also, from a logistical point of view, tried to get away with doing it without a permit. There were guards, and we had a little bit of sort of dodging and ducking, but we managed to pull it off. And it's fitting that we end with Glenn and Linda, since they're sort of matriarch and patriarch of the modern day Ailey company. I think they had a baby, I think, not long ago, and have both finally moved on. But so that's it, Ron. I think we can stop sharing at this point and see if there's a couple more questions.
We do. We have some questions here. So let me just change this. Let's see. Okay, so the first question is, since we just ended with the trip to South Africa, I had a question from Timothy Park asking, like, did you have a scouting team for that? Which I know you didn't, but how are you doing it with locations? Did you have like somebody local there who kind of like guided you to places, or?
Yeah, we did. Excellent question. We did. We had a film production company help us, because I hired a DP, a camera operator, for the film portion of this trip, because I directed 3 short documentaries. They're all on YouTube. If you look up Alien South Africa, I think they'll all come up. There's one on the photography, there's one on the company visiting, and then there's one on the company doing outreach. He was associated with a film production company whose name is escaping me at the moment, but they had access to locations and ideas for us. So
Good.
they were really helpful. Funny enough, we kind of did the animal parks more or less on our own, but they helped us with Musenberg Beach and with the Atlantis dunes. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I've got a number of questions here. So we're going to start with JL. His question is, how do you work with the Ailey company to generate social media content, and does that change your approach, to shooting?
Not really. I think it changes it sort of changes the after the picture's taken experience. Social media wasn't really anything that I ever factored into my work. It's still a relatively newer concept that those of us that have been shooting for more than 2 decades, in my case 3, sort of aren't considering as we're doing it. There are times where there's formats that you must consider when you're shooting. Back in the day when we shot album covers, they were square and you need to take a square picture to fit. Then there was the CD long box. We had to take a long picture. Sometimes if I'm shooting something specifically for a billboard or a bus side, there's different formats that I need to compose for. Social media is different because it's like, I think there are certain things that get created specifically for social media. The GIFs that we do work really well. But I don't think it's more, I go about my business of taking the pictures and then, the folks at Ailey will figure out how to fit it into the social media, whatever social media platform they have. The one thing that is different now is that the dancers have a fair bit of photo approval. That was something that changed over the years as they sort of evolved into understanding that their image is being put out there all over the place. So there is a certain approval process. I can't and wouldn't ever just take some random photograph and put it on social media without it having gone through an approval process with the company and the dancers. Mutual respect there.
Okay. Heather Haney asks, your images are so sharp and clear. Any advice for someone trying to improve in this area?
Sure. I mean, there was a time where sharp, crisp, clear pictures really required bigger cameras or certain technical needs or tools. Now, most of our 35 millimeter cameras are so sharp. I do a certain amount of my work with Hasselblad cameras, which are large format and they have enormous film backs, super high res. But the truth is, all the newer Canons and Nikon cameras are plenty sharp enough to take the kinds of pictures that most of the South Africa, really all of the South Africa work, I shot all with 35 millimeter cameras with Nikon, I believe. And the one thing is be wary of the ISO that you're able to shoot with. If you jack up your ISO with slightly older Nikon or Canon cameras, you're going to get a sort of a slightly grainier look, more pixelated look. A lot of the newer cameras can handle very high ISOs, and you can still get something really sharp. But honestly, most pictures, or most cameras that folks are shooting with these days can render this kind of quality.
Okay, Kimmy Dobbs Chan says, and I don't know if this is correct or not. She says, now that you work with some film, have you found your contrast levels evolving? But I think you've gone from film and you're all digital now, isn't that right?
I went from film to digital. I think one of the things that happened for a lot of us photographers that did the first half of our, that used film for the first half of our careers, when we evolved into digital, we were sort of used to doing everything in camera. I was used to filtering for color. I was used to making sure that I processed for contrast, and everything was done. I had this final, it was carved in stone. Here, I would hand over this final picture. It was hard for some of us to get used to the fact that when we took a picture with a digital camera, it was sort of like a half-baked recipe. It's the recipe, but it's not the fully baked item. And for years, I don't think I was doing anything anywhere near enough with my images to bring them to their fullest potential. You know, I obviously don't mess around a ton in Photoshop, but I spend a great deal of time, or have somebody else spend a great deal of time working my images to bring them up to feeling and looking as strong as I know they can. So, yeah.
Okay, hopefully I'm going to say this right. My Sato actually posed this question back when you did that, when you showed that shot of the group kind of coming up off the ground. And her question was, how many lights do you usually use for group shots in the studio?
Right. All right. So here's the 90-second stop motion lesson. Essentially, when you are in a studio and you're shooting with strobes, there's a thing referred to as flash duration, which is how long your strobe turns on and off, okay? And then simultaneously, the other thing that you're working with is shutter speed, where your camera opens and closes. So ultimately, you want two things to work in your favor. And one is you want lights that come on and off very, very quickly, and you want a shutter that's open and closes very, very quickly. Most of the strobes that we use in the studio will turn on and off at a rate that's slower than what your camera opens and closes. So there's things that you have to sort of do to work together with those. But a short answer is you need enough light to light your subjects. But if you end up having to turn those lights up very, very high, like turn the power way up on your strobes, the light comes on and goes off. And that doesn't work well for stopping motion, because if you have a dancer coming through the frame, your camera's open, the lights come on, they're lit as they're moving. So there's kind of a drag. But if they're in the air and they're moving and the lights come on and off like that, they're frozen in this brief moment of light, whether your camera opens and closes quickly or not. So there's a number of different things. You know, you want to protect against too much light bouncing around in a white room, stuff like that. But essentially, the sort of part of freezing motion in the studio that's part technical and even partly financial is that you need quite a lot of lights on low power. So what we tend to use is I'll have, say, 4 different soft boxes, each with its own pack and head, all on very low power. So I get a lot of light, I get spread to cover all those dancers, but I can keep the powers turned way down low so this light comes on and off very, very quickly like that and freezes them. Because otherwise you'll get hands and you'll get feet that kind of have this blur, this kind of drag. Anyway, again, I teach workshops on this sort of stuff, so I can maybe help you down the road.
For those of you who are interested, you can go to Andrew Eccles' website, and I'm sure there's a way to contact him through that and get on his email list, and you'll find out when he does any kind of workshops. Denise Leitner asked, do you direct the poses or are the dancers improvising?
A little of both. For the PR and marketing, usually those were directed by the company choreographer and sometimes even the creative director. They would help. They would help with what technically needed to be precise, because again, like I said, as much as I may know the company and various dances, I'm not gonna know exactly what that thing is called in that moment. And I've learned over the years, having photographed them for so long, like I know what a sickle foot is. I never knew what that is, but that's not good. Dancers will see a picture of themselves with a sickle foot and they'll like, ugh, that's no good. And they'll want to do it again. Or if, a hand is, or there's a splits in the air and the legs are too high, or they're straight, or they're crooked. Those are the things that I need somebody else's help with, and either the dancer or the choreographer. So I usually have help. Once in a while, some of those South African sessions, I was kind of on my own to let the dancers improvise and hope that it was, suitable. Yeah.
Even when you're working with a team, though, let's say you're doing, a marketing shoot for Alvin Ailey's companies, and everybody's there, and they're setting up the pose or the leap or something, and are there any times that you as a photographer look at it and say, "Why, I think this would look better if they turned this way," or do you just kind of go along with?
Oh, very much so. I mean, at the beginning, particularly at the beginning, because the one thing that I knew that they didn't sometimes know is what happens to bodies through the camera. There's like, say somebody jumps and does a splits towards the lens, just the way you're seeing on Zoom right now, the leg out in front gets huge, the leg in the back gets very little. There's certain poses and certain sort of camera angles that that do odd foreshortening that sort of don't look graceful or pretty. And so sometimes they would have an idea and I would shoot it and I would say, hey, this isn't going to work because this, that, and the other. And then, oh, it looks like their back legs coming out of their head or what have you. So yes, often. Oh, sure. I'll sort of see where they're going, but I'll quickly now. And of course, now I'm not shy about saying, hey, I don't think that's going to work.
Okay. Next question from Ashley Siona, and I'm going to answer part of it and then turn it over to you. But she's asking, what's the best advice you can give someone wanting to start working with a company, and what's the best way to approach them? And so if Ashley, you're talking about like you're just wanting to get into dance photography, then the first thing you need to do is start shooting with dancers and just go find some dancers and just basically do free shoots with them, and just to start building up a portfolio. And because when you go approach that dance school and say, hey, I'd like to start working with you, the first thing they're going to see is, well, what do you do? Let me see what you've shot now. And that's kind of the same way that Andrew started with that company in the very beginning, where he did that shoot in Annie's studio, and that kind of led to a lot of other things, and eventually led to his shooting with getting assignments through Dance Inc. But Andrew, if you can take it from somebody who's established as a dance photographer, how then would you suggest that they approach a professional dance company?
So I think if you're relatively established or doing fairly well in your career, I think by all means go to a dance company and offer yourself, offer your services. The one thing that I think most of us that work with dancers and dance companies know is it's not a very well funded art form. There's not a whole lot of money in the performing arts in general, in dance and dance companies in particular. So it may end up being something where a company would very much like to have a photographer of your caliber, but may not be able to afford you. I always feel like I'm happy to photograph dancers for free. I mean, thankfully the Ailey company pays me, and that's great. But I've often worked with dancers for no fee in exchange for the images or the opportunity to work with them. But I think, look, the offering one's services to a dance company who needs images and doesn't have a lot of money, perhaps there's sort of something you can strike a deal where they can afford to pay for whatever expenses, your lighting and your assistant, and then maybe if the images are beautiful, prints could be sold and some money could be made back for you that way. But I would say approach it as though it's going to be a labor of love before a monetary kind of situation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate the comments here about some people saying that, okay, you need to see the dance company and find out what they're about and have some knowledge of them. And that's, to me, that's kind of a given. Like, you need to do your homework, before you go see them. Whether it's a professional company or a dance school, you need to know what they're all about. Because, for example, if you're a ballet photographer and you're going and approaching an Irish dance school, it's a whole new ballpark. So
yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, that's the beautiful thing about sort of the creative arts, right? Like dance companies appreciate photography and vice versa. you know, I think that the sort of, we're all coming at it from the same desire to make something beautiful that sort of is in our favor.
And then one last question, and then
Yeah.
we can wrap up. And Kimmy Dobbs-Chan, earlier she was actually asking about video, and I was thinking she was talking about photography. But she says when, like in South Africa, when you hired somebody to do the filming, you know, how much are you talking to them about lens choice and things like that, or you kind of like letting them figure it out on their own?
We, so this has become a much bigger deal in this era of image making. Moving film, moving images, video are a big part of what we capture now. Stills haven't fully taken a back seat, but let's face it, people like to click on things that move. People like to see images that move. So I'm working with DPs and camera operators on a lot of my different projects now. I work as a director. I give them obviously a certain amount of freedom. I respect their lens choices or their creative choices to a degree. But in South Africa, we talked really before every day. We had a number of meetings before I got there, but we talked about what things we might use a steady cam. There were times in rehearsal where we used a boom. There were times that should be handheld. Other times we'd be on a tripod, long lenses, shallow depth of field. I tried to direct as much of that as I could. And we worked sort of in tandem, not shoulder to shoulder, but a great deal of what he was capturing with motion was sort of what I was capturing with stills. So, but those two, you know, that's a big part of our medium now. We're all of us still photographers are really asked, we're being asked to be directors now as well as photographers. It kind of goes with the territory.
Yep. Okay, well, I think that is it. Andrew, thank you so much. You've been so generous and just really interesting just to see how your whole, you know, career started and how it's taken you to where you are today. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you all for joining us and hanging in there. Look at that; it's exactly 10:30, 90 minutes. See, I told you perfectionism.
I told you it would go an hour and a half.
Had a feeling it's easy to talk on and on. I hope it was of interest and I didn't overstay my welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Ron.
You did not at all. It was very, very, very much enjoyable. Okay, thank you very much, Andrew.
One last thing before we go. I just wanted to acknowledge, and I kept referring to the choreographer. Masazumi Chaya is the name of the choreographer that I worked with for many, many years. I've always just called him Chaya. So, you know, my dear friend who's no longer with the company, but he was really the director behind many of our photo shoots. He was my co-collaborator. Judith was always involved. Robert would sort of stroll in and out. He's not that controlling. But really Chaya was, I couldn't have taken all these pictures without him and his help. Thomas Cotton, Christopher Zinner, and everybody at Eccles who's had so much to do with making all of these images look the way they do. So I thank them all.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And let's touch base in just a moment. And thank you everybody for attending, and we will catch you guys on the next webinar.
Good luck with your photography, everyone.